Good morning. Oh no, I flew away from Los Angeles. Let's get some more energy. Good morning. Wow, you all look good. So when you're giving the opening keynote, you really have one job, and that's to not suck. And the reason that I can't suck is because if I'm really terrible, Kat will spend the entire time apologizing for my suckiness, right? So my job is to not suck. Amongst a couple other things, it's to answer one of the questions that we're here to talk about today, is how do you get men involved in the fight for gender equality, right? Like, that's the question I get asked over and over and over again, is like, how do I get men to show up? One of the answers to that question is this conference is for you. You don't understand what I mean, do you? Right? Okay. So, for the men in the audience, right? This is a women's conference, right? But the women are here to talk about all of the things that you have not done, right? And they're here to strategize about, okay, how do I get men, as Sarah Moore Grimke says, to take their feet off our necks? That's the question. So I want to ground us in that quote. So Sarah Moore Grimke is an abolitionist and feminist, and she was born in 1873. 1873. And she's got a quote that's really famous, and that quote is, "I ask no favor for my sex. All that I ask is that our brethren take their feet off our necks." That was an analysis that was in 1873. So women have been asking the question about how do we get men to understand their role in gender equality. So I'm going to try to ask you all a bunch of real hard questions, right? And some of them I will answer, and some of them are for you to really wrestle with. But I must first own something, that I didn't even know that these conferences were for men. I didn't even know a lot of different things because I existed in a state of unconsciousness. And I'm going to warn you, I do not like the word woke because it actually doesn't mean anything. It actually doesn't mean anything. Who's the most woke in this room? Oh, we don't know, right? So what the word is really trying to say is, are you at a certain level of consciousness in the way that you think about the world? And I wasn't. I was an idiot for many, many years, but I got really lucky. So I used to work at this place where I used to work with these young kids. And it was an LGBTQ organization, and I was a director. And I was hired as a director without any experience working with kids. Imagine that. And this was a nonprofit organization, and what nonprofits do is that they have to fundraise. And this nonprofit brought me in because they said, wow, former NFL player, gay, we can raise money off of this guy, right? Because that's what nonprofits have to do. And I understood that, tacitly as well. And then they gave me a director role. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool, right? But there were some women who worked there who had many more years of experience, who actually had degrees in this type of work, and I was their boss. Imagine that. And there was one young woman who worked there, and we'll call her Erica, and I gave her a directive, and she did not agree with the directive. And I was trying to de-escalate her, right? And I looked at her and I said, sweetie, calm down. I told you I was an idiot, right? And she looked at me and she said, don't ever call me sweetie. And my response was, but I'm a good person. You knew my intent. You know me, come on, right? Like all these things that we say when we want someone to forgive us from actually doing harm. Because I did harm there, right? But I didn't get it. So my supervisor at the time, a woman named Lillian Rivera, and it's important that I say her name. She called me into her office and she asked me one question. She said, what do you think caused Erica to respond the way that she did? And I gave her a bunch of blah, blah, blah. She said, great. She reached behind her desk and she grabbed this book. She said, go read that. And this book was by a woman named Bell Hooks. The book was called Feminist Theory from Margin to Center. And I had really, I had heard of the word feminist and all these things, and I was like, yeah, that's great. Women in gender studies, yeah, right? I get it. Women, you deserve equality, right? So I go back and I read this book. And I'm like, interesting. And I go back to her office and she asked me the exact same question. What caused Erica to respond the way that she did? And I give her the exact same answer, and she laughed, and she said, ha ha, read it again. I was like, damn. Right, so I go home, and the book's about 200 pages. It's not that big, but it's pretty dense. So I read it a second time. I'm like, I got it this time. I got it. I go back to her office. She asked me the exact same question. And I go, blah, blah, blah. And she laughs hysterically. Read it again. And I'm like, just tell me what you want me to know. And she says, if I tell you, it won't become personal. It won't become personal. So I go back and I read it for the third time. And about halfway through, it becomes personal. And I realize that this book is about me. This book is about me. So for the men in this room, this conference is about you. Because what Bell Hook was articulating was an experience that I had no clue of. Because here was the truth. All through my middle school and high school time, and even my time in college, I wasn't given many books to read about women. Most of the stories that I had heard, right, were about men. I had understood how men built the entire world, but I had yet to understand what the impact that women had. So here's a question. How many of you can name all of the amazing men who did amazing stuff during the Civil War? All of you can name a lot of men's names, right? Do you know that 1/3 of all working age men died during the Civil War? So who do you think was running these local towns, cities, and states while all the working age men were dead? Women. But none of you know any of their names. What's the impact of that? What is the impact that you are educated in a world where women are not seen as your competition? What does it mean that you're educated in a world where women are not seen to be change makers in the world? So I'm writing a book right now, and I'm doing a lot of research. And I've done some research on statues in America. There are 5,913 statues in America. There are less than 350 of those statues are of women. Of those 300, and I think it's 53 statues, over half are fictional characters. What is this? Someone's laughing because they understand the impact of that. We as men don't grow up seeing women as ourselves. We don't grow up seeing women as our reflection. We grow up seeing you as our attendants, that you attend to our needs. If you look at the history of work in this country, women were brought into the workplace as assistants, as secretaries, and then they get a promotion to executive assistant, senior secretary. And we throw out these weird terms like, oh, those are soft skills, right? Right now in America, there are more men named James as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies than there are women. Let that sit with you for just a second. There are more men named James as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies than there are of women. What's the impact of that? What is the impact on how our society is being built, about how our society is being created? What is the impact of that, right? The impact is we call people sweetie. And we make excuses for the fact that, well, I'm a good person. You understand what I meant. The truth is, men, no one cares if you're a good person. No one cares. The question is, what are you doing? Because we love to ask the question about when are men going to be allies? And we as men love to say, hey, I'm an ally. You actually don't get to name yourself an ally. You actually have to do something in order to be an ally. Ally is not a noun, it's a verb. You actually have to do something. So the question that I want to ask the men in the room, and it's a really serious question, what are you willing to give up to achieve gender equality? What are you willing to give up? You have to give up something because you've gained so much in the process. What are you willing to give up? You have to go really deep. And as my supervisor told me at the time, how do you make this issue personal? How do you make it personal is the question. How do you make it personal? Because when you're asking the questions, when will women achieve gender equality, we're asking the wrong question. The question is, why don't they already have it? That's a very different question, right? So because we're often asking the wrong questions. We're asking, how do we get men to come to these types of conferences? No, the question is, why are men not already here? Why are men not already here? And there's one answer. And you have to really understand what I say when I mean you have to understand what I mean when I say this. The answer is fear. Fear is why men don't come to these conferences. Fear is why we don't have gender equality in the workplace right now. And one of the ways that you know we're afraid is that we make certain asks of you women. One of the asks that we've made of you is make the business case for gender equality. Make the business case for gender equality. Let's flip that on its head for a second. What's the business case for men to run the world? There is no business case. It's axiomatic, which means it's self-evident that men should be able to run the world. So the fact that we're asking you women to make a case undergirds that says that we don't think that you should be or that you can. If we're asking the question, what to make the business case for gender equality, we must have an assumption about you to begin with, because there is no business case for men, right? So let's stop asking women to make the business case, because what the business case really says is that I don't believe that you're competent. Prove to me that what I believe about you is wrong. And go out and get some data and prove it. And guess what women did? They went out and got the data. Imagine having to prove something where none of you actually exist, right? So first you got to make it up the business ladder, right? You got to become in the C-suite and VPs and all those things. And then you got to interview all those women and ask all those questions. And then in about 1970, you gave men the data. You gave them the data, and the data says when an organization is more than 30% at senior levels women, that organization is more successful. That's what the data said. And guess what we're left with? More men named James as CEOs than there are women. Because the ask in itself was corrupt. Because you gave them the data. And why has nothing changed? What has caused nothing to change? Because the ask in itself was not a real ask. It was a tax. It was a tax. We've been making you pay a tax just because you are women. Just because you are women. And then we say things like, go start these employee resource groups. And then we say, you should create a women's empowerment group. We should get rid of women's empowerment group because there are no men's empowerment group. Because the term empowerment means women don't have power. You need to be given power. Women don't need shit, but you to get out of their damn way. I opened my time with you with a quote by Sarah Moore Grimke. What she said was, I ask no favor for my sex. I only ask that our brethren, the word brethren is important, to take their feet off our necks, which means women are just saying, men, the barriers you've created in the workplace, it's your job to remove them, not mine. It's your job to remove them. And you're my brethren. You're my brethren, which means that you're no longer my ally. Because living in a world where women don't have access to political, social, and economic equality means that men, we are impacted by it too. Men, we are impacted by it too. When women cannot show up in the workplace and in the world as equal, guess what, men? We lose too. We lose too. And I have a secret for you, men. You can't learn this when you have a daughter. It's too late. It's too late, right? Because a lot of the men who I work with, and I do a lot of coaching with men, they love to tell me, hey, you know what, now that I have a daughter, I get this gender stuff. I really get it. Oh, and I'm ready to get engaged now and involved. Women can't wait till you all have daughters for you to actually care. Imagine that. Imagine waiting and say, hey, you know, Bob's gonna have a daughter soon. Maybe he's gonna start caring now, right? No, right? The question that you must ask yourself is, what caused you to need to have a daughter for you to actually care, right? And that thing is fear. Fear that you have to give something up. The question is, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up that friend who actually says a lot of problematic things? Are you willing to give up your safety when you're in a meeting and you hear one of your male colleagues regurgitate something a woman just said? Are you willing to actually stand up and say, hey, she just said that? Are you willing to give up something? What are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up the fact that you get a promotion or you get hired for a job just because you're a former NFL player? Are you willing to say, actually, Erica is more qualified than me, I should be working for her? What are you willing to give up is the only question that you should leave here asking yourself. Because power is not given, it's taken. And what women have been asking is for a moral revolution. It's the first nonviolent moral revolution that we've ever really witnessed. It's a moral nonviolent revolution. So we've got to go inside. We've got to go inwards and really start to ask ourselves really hard questions about what we're willing to give up. And here's the key. You win too. You win too. The thing that I've won the most is I've won myself back. I read probably 2 books a month. And the books that I've read, that I've been given the most from, is when I've read books written by women. Because they've given me myself back. When I've read these books, I've been able to see myself. I've been able to see my frailties. I've been able to see my fears. I've been able to see me. So my ask of you men in the room is that when you leave here, read. Read. Women have laid themselves bare for you to wake up. The Me Too movement is not counter to men, it's a gift to men. And don't tell women anymore that you had no clue that all these things that they were experiencing were going on. Stop telling them that lie. And the reason I know you're lying is because when you have a daughter, now you say, I want to act now. So you already knew these things were happening. And the daughter that you're now excited to work for is the reason that we knew that you already know. So push yourself to think about what you're willing to give up. Push yourself to stop giving women more labor than they already have. Push yourself to figure out, lastly, what are you willing to give up? Thank you.